Hi, I'm Ems, aka on Deck and Wings. So the best wet palette you can have is also the cheapest because it's one you make yourself. If you already have a pre-bought one, that's perfectly fine. I have another video in the description below about using a wet palette better. However, I just use the casing from the one I've previously bought and use my own materials now. So if you want to make one yourself, you basically need three things. So you need some sort of container, so like a Tupperware container or some sort of container that food's been in as long as you clean it out. You'll want some kitchen roll or one of those thin cleaning sponges from a kitchen. And most importantly, you want some baking paper. I'll put the one I use in the description below. Like I said at the beginning, if you already own a wet palette, the main thing I would recommend is to change the paper you use. You don't want to use the pre-cut sheets, you want to use some sort of baking paper instead. As I said at the beginning though, if you already have a pre-done wet palette, it's fine to use the sponge. It's the paper that's the main thing you need to change. However, once that sponge gets manky, you'll want to switch to kitchen roll. It's a lot cheaper. So going back to the containers now. So you can either use the bottom of the container lid, or you can actually use the top of the container lid as your palette and use the bottom as the lid, if that makes sense. I've seen some professional painters use the bottom of the lid instead. So I wanted to show you how easy it is even out of some old trash. So this is from an old sushi container which I've cleaned out. Grab your kitchen roll, I've cut that to size. I know it's a bit of a pain having to cut things to size, but if you do it all in a batch lot, it saves you a lot of time. So you just want to pop it inside and then you want to soak it in water. So go to a sink or just pour some water over the top. After you've added the water, you'll want to smooth it out a little bit with a card or a brush. Now for the baking paper, you want that to be cut slightly smaller than the palette itself. This will stop it from riding up and will absorb the water better and stick to the palette more. You'll want to add a little bit more water over the top of that and then smooth it out again with a paintbrush or a card. And you can always pour away some of the excess water because we don't want too much because it'll wash our paints out too much. So I wanted to show you as well how to actually add paint to the palette. I know this seems super obvious and a little bit pedantic, but it's always good to know. So if you're using Citadel paints, you want to get an old brush, dunk it in and then put a blob of it onto the palette. The more the blob you paint is, the less likely it is to dry out. And also make sure that your paints are shaken up as well because they will separate over time. I like to be quite neat and ordered with my wet palette, but if you're more chaotic that's fine, but it does help to keep these paints at the top and around the side of your palette. Essentially the paint at the top is like me reloading it, so I take a blob of it with a clean brush. Add a bit more water if needed, so if your paint separates you need more water to it to bind it. And then what a lot of people don't do, I don't see enough of, is wiping away the excess from the paint so it's not too watery and you've got more control with it. A lot of people will tell you, oh, thin your paints, too thin coats, but then they never say, yeah, but make sure you wipe away the excess first before you add it to the model because it'll be too watery and too hard to control. So if you can see here, our paint is still thin, but we do have that control with it because it's not too watery. It's also advisable to paint with the body of the brush and not the tip of it. The tip is mainly for our detailed work, so when you're adding your layers and your bases, it's better to use the full body of the brush, so the side of it. Don't forget to clean your brush in between switching paints. You can put your lid back on once you're done with that session and those paints will stay moist. So as always, thank you for watching. Remember to enjoy your hobbies for yourself, respect the people who enjoy them in their own ways, and at the end of the day, they're just war dollies.